So y'all heard about Drag Queen Story Hour? Now this video isn't about Drag Queen Story Hour. I'm sure you guys know the tale at this point. It was a big deal by some people on the right a year or so ago, I think it might have been a little bit more than a year, where there were drag queens at libraries telling stories to kids. And people on the right were saying that this is degenerate, this is sick, who knows if these drag queens are pedophiles or not. People on the left were saying, you're ridiculous, it's harmless. And then it turned out that Brett Blom, who is a children's court judge and former president of Cream City, was arrested a little while ago on charges of child pornography. As you can see, his LinkedIn shows this to be the case, as does his employment page on the Cream City Foundation website. However, Snopes.com has debunked it. No, Drag Queen Story Hour leader wasn't arrested on child porn charges. Now, Snopes has rated this as false, and the meat of the fact-checking article says that the Cream City Foundation, which is what Blom was the president and CEO of, is a Milwaukee-based LGBTQ advocacy group that offers grants and scholarships. The Cream City Foundation was the fiscal sponsor to Drag Queen Story Hour's Milwaukee chapter. So it turns out that Drag Queen Story Hour Milwaukee has never been run by the Cream City Foundation or Brett Blom, and they've never participated in planning, organizing, hosting, or performing at any of the events. They've only taken donations from them. Of course, there's also the fact that the same organization actually did have a registered child sex offender read to kids in drag in a different city, so I don't blame people for making a few connections here. If we were to talk about this objectively, you will notice that in terms of this specific case, there is little in the way of direct evidence, but there is a lot of circumstantial evidence. That being said, when Snopes.com rates this officially, puts their stamp on it and everything as false, do you believe them? Should you? The errors in fact-checking sites like Snopes has been an ongoing meme now for a while, and with good reason. Let me show you what I mean. Here's another story that Snopes fact-checked. Has Iowa seen an alarming increase in vanishing children this summer? Statistics sound much scarier and presented without any context whatsoever. Oh, damn. The claim is the state of Iowa has seen an alarming increase in vanishing children reports in the summer of 2018. They have rated it as mostly false. What you'll notice is that in fact-checking articles where they're trying to obfuscate something, they will make them extremely long. Usually these things are quite short if it's just to the point. And then they'll actually hide the truth in the final paragraph. While the missing persons numbers presented by Free Thought Project were accurate at the time of publication, the implication that they represented an alarming trend or deviation from normal rates of missing persons was without basis. So this group that published the numbers, Free Thought Project, they were still correct. For some reason you got an implication there that may not have actually been in the article, but the data itself was right. And if the data itself was right, why do you feel the need to say Rachel Blevins penned an article for the conspiracy-prone site Free Thought Project? Why say conspiracy-prone site? If it really is fact-checking, if it's just the facts, ma'am, why are you adding those kind of flourishes? Is the COVID-19 vaccine female sterilization? Oh, this is a big one. That's completely false, apparently. The story was sourced from a blog called Health and Money News and referenced statements made by Michael Yedden, who left the company in 2011. His title there was Vice President and Chief Scientist for Allergy and Respiratory, so he's somebody who probably knows at least a little bit about this. Yedden sent a letter calling on EMA to halt clinical trials of the COVID-19 vaccine in the EU. In the letter, he stated that the vaccine blocks a protein that is key in the formation of the placenta in mammals, and they claimed it's possible women who receive the vaccine could become infertile. They did not state as fact that the vaccine causes sterility. The Associated Press reported the vaccine is still considered experimental while final testing is done. So, we have an instance where it's not clear, like, I'm not going to make any kind of grand proclamations regarding what this vaccine actually does, but we can safely and honestly say it's not clear. We don't know yet. Somebody who is an expert says that infertility might happen, but on a technical, medical level, infertility is not sterility. So Snopes found this false. Did AOC exaggerate the danger she was in during the Capitol riot? The claim is AOC exaggerated the danger she was in during the riot, in that she wasn't even in the Capitol building where the rioting occurred. And that is in quotes, wasn't even in the Capitol building. Again, Snopes rates it mostly false. What's true? AOC wasn't in the main Capitol building where the House and Senate chambers are located. So literally, the main contention that you quoted in the claim is true, and yet this is mostly false to Snopes. What's false is that AOC never claimed to be in the main Capitol building, and when the attack began, she was in her office, which is located in a network of office buildings immediately surrounding the Capitol, and her office building was one of the 2 buildings that were evacuated. Okay, but the claim was that she wasn't even in the Capitol building, and that was true. Did a convicted terrorist sit on the board of a Black Lives Matter funding body? The past crimes of Susan Rosenberg reemerge in the summer of 2020. The claim is that Rosenberg is a convicted terrorist who sits on the board of the directors of Thousand Currents, an organization which handles fundraising for the BLM Global Network. Snopes rated this as a mixture. So what's true? Rosenberg has served as vice chair of the board of directors for Thousand Currents, and she was an active member of revolutionary left-wing movements whose illegal activities included bombing U.S. government buildings and committing armed robberies. What's undetermined? In the absence of a single, universally agreed definition of terrorism, it is a matter of subjective determination as to whether the actions for which Rosenberg was convicted and imprisoned, possession of weapons and hundreds of pounds of explosives, should be described as acts of domestic terrorism. There is no way that any reasonable person would not look at this and see Snopes trying to cover something up, playing ball for their team. If it were the inverse, if it were, say, the guy who rammed his car into a crowd, and I think that was Charlottesville, if it were that guy who gets invited to sit on like a right-wing board 10 years or 20 years later, Snopes would be writing these fact-checking articles saying, it's true he's a terrorist, 100%, and people would be up in fucking arms about it. And you know what? Rightfully so. This is a person who went to jail on terrorism charges, but because it's left-wing terrorism, Snopes goes to bat for them. Did U.S. presidential candidate Joe Biden say he had no empathy for the plight of younger people? Oh look, it's mixed. What's true? In 2018, Biden did say he had no empathy for the plight of younger people. What the fuck else do you need? What's false? Biden was making a specific and emphatic comparison between the relative progress and civility of the present moment on one hand, and the upheaval and civil discord of his own youth in the late 1960s. He was not speaking in general or absolute terms. If you switch this around, again, if this were Trump saying something, they'd be hitting it with true, and they'd be pushing it fucking everywhere. I'm using Snopes because, frankly, it's kind of easy, but PolitiFact does this, the New York Times, frankly, any outlet that says they're officially fact-checking something. The implication is that they're neutral, they're impartial, they can be trusted. They are going to look through what a politician says and tell you, the reader, what the actual truth is. Where did they lie? Where did they just make a mistake or kind of flub their words a little bit? And where are they telling the absolute truth? And there's certainly an air of impartiality to it, of authority. The idea that these are the facts. You can't trust them, but you can trust us. Of course, for that trust to be earned, you have to actually be impartial. You actually have to tell the truth, even when you might not personally agree with it. And the reason I gave you these examples is to show you that it doesn't happen all the time. There is obviously a political bias within these organizations. And here's what's really funny. When they actually do properly fact-check something, the New York Times properly fact-checking the first 2020 presidential debate, and they realize that no, reality is not simply one-sided, it's not all just Orange Man bad, people lose their minds. Look at how many people are screaming that the New York Times dare actually fact-check at least a little impartially. It's not even that great, but it's not all just pure Orange Man bad propaganda. And look at them. Look at how angry they are. It is no surprise to me that these propagandists are telling the big lie. Here's a great example. It has been repeated and repeated and repeated millions of times since Charlottesville that Trump said, specifically in reference to the neo-Nazis at that rally, that you have some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
But even though Trump said that clip, and the short, 5-second clip was circulated around the internet like wildfire, it wasn't actually about the neo-Nazis at the rally. That was about the peaceful protesters on both sides, on the left and the right. Because in the same press conference, Trump said, "I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally."
And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
But is that clip ever remembered? Did that get spread around like wildfire millions of times? No, of course not. When Trump talked about his supporters protesting at the Capitol, is it ever mentioned that he said he wants them to do it peacefully and patriotically? No, of course not. Because if you have a narrative, you can't let the truth get in the way of that. And when you corrupt the fact checkers and you use their innate authority as supposed truth tellers in the service of that narrative, you have basically made it so that people aren't going to trust fact checking anymore. And that's a dangerous place to be. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. And it's basically like, there'll be a larger video on it at some point, like something that's really well written and well thought out and well scripted. It's something like science versus sciencism, if that makes sense. I'm not anti-science by any stretch of the imagination, but science tells us what the world is, not what we should do about it. How many times have you seen somebody try to push a political opinion on you, and they do so by opening with "studies show," "research suggests," "trust the science," "listen to the experts"? All that is sciencism. It's not actually a search for truth. It's simply an appeal to authority. And the problem with that, though, is that a lot of science truly is an appeal to authority. Let me explain. Let's say that you have a study, and let's say that that study was published by an accredited university with a good record. And let's say the professor who published it, he is known in his field for being competent, he's known personally for being honest. There is no reason to suspect that he's simply using his clout to push an ideological agenda. But how can you know? Unless you recreate his study yourself, at some point you simply have to take his word for it. Which is why a lot of the arguments made by the science-ismists, for lack of a better term, they're all fundamentally arguments from authority. When someone says, "Studies show X is true, what are you doing not believing X?" They are not saying that X is true. They are saying that accredited people believe X is true, and what are you doing going against them? This is a fundamental problem with knowledge. Unless you do the study yourself, you can't truly know if it's true. At some point, you have to take that leap of faith where you trust that the institution of the school and the peer review process and the honesty of the professor and everything else comes together to actually create something that approaches the truth. At some point, you have to trust that unless you're going to literally recreate everything yourself. Let's say that you want to build a house and you hire the best construction company in your area. Their reputation speaks for them, but what is the percentage chance that they will take your money and run, or they will make a shit house that collapses in 6 months? Well, it's low, but it's not zero, and that's kind of the point. Eventually, you simply have to take things at face value and hope they work out. That's part of, I guess, being in a high-trust society. But that only works if the people who are doing these jobs, whether it be construction or making these studies or doing these fact-checking, if they're actually honest consistently. And we're no longer at that point. This kind of ties into my previous video about grifters, where Vosh or other socialists say that there's no real truth, there's only power. If you actually believe that, you get a completely non-functioning society, because you can no longer trust that people will do the things that they say they're going to do. You can no longer trust that the facts as reported to you are actually the facts. The culture that socialists want to build destroys the capitalist economy, not necessarily because they're opposed to it politically or something, but because capitalism functions when you can basically trust the person that you've never even met before to actually do the job that you hire them to do. And one of the ways the socialist tries to stop capitalism is by making everyone distrust each other. Because to them, it's less about the truth, less about the facts, and more about the morals, more about the ideology. And no, I'm not just talking out of my ass. You can hear that come out of AOC's own mouth if you want. Take a listen.
One of the criticisms of you is that your math is fuzzy. The Washington Post recently awarded you 4 Pinocchios.
Oh my goodness.
For misstating some statistics about Pentagon spending.
If people want to really blow up one figure here or one word there, I would argue that they're missing the forest for the trees. I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
This position that AOC and Vosh hold to, and that so many other socialists also spout right now, it is absolutely corrosive to a civil, functioning society. And it is the reason that we're starting to see shit like this. Remember this? When Chinese propaganda used the line, "study shows," in order to push their fascist bullshit? Because of course they would. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't every single propagandist that has a narrative they want to shove down everyone's throat simply do this from now on? Just claim that a study says their political ideals are true. They can even commission one. Why not? Buy off a university and have them do it. Again, I'm not anti-science. Science has its place. It is the only tool we have to figure out what's actually going on around us. It seems to be the height of arrogance that someone would come to you and tell you, this is the objective truth. Only I know what it is. And only I have been empowered by all of these various social institutions to make this claim on reality. And then to say something that is so blatantly, obviously false. There is no way that this isn't a power play by people who do not respect the concept of truth at all. The worst part about this is, I have no real solution. We are now stuck in a bind. We used to be able to trust that the universities actually meant something, but they don't anymore. We used to be able to trust that the journalists would expose the truth. They don't anymore. We used to be able to believe that fact checkers actually cared about checking the facts, and they don't anymore. And without suitable replacements for those things, we are quite lost at the moment. But it's not completely hopeless. I think if you tell the truth, or at least don't lie, and surround yourself with people doing the same, we can probably muddle through this together. These corrupt systems will not last forever. They'll eventually topple under the weight of their own failures. And it will be a painful process, to be sure. It'll just take time and effort. And your part in that process is to never compromise your principles. Never say something that you know in your conscience not to be true. Even if it disagrees with me. I'm not saying you should do what I want. I'm saying hold yourself to a standard and don't give in no matter who comes for you. And I think if we do that enough, we will approach something that is approximately resembling the truth. And despite all of our fallibility, and despite all of our own problems, and despite starting from, in some cases, nothing, that will get us far closer to the truth than anybody who claims they're socialist will ever get. Thank you for watching, my friends. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to share it around and do all of the other algorithm positive stuff that the YouTube engagement metrics like. I don't know. Sub for more, or hit up my Patreon or Subscribestar if you want to keep it coming. And be sure to stick around, because I'm putting up a new video every single day. So, I'll see you tomorrow. I love you.